get a life-size statue of what she looked like with all her gear on, with a helmet and breathing apparatus. And so you have a triple in this case with Inanna Ishtar. The description and the flying and the vehicle, all of this. Plus there was these things called the me. The me was basically like, we would think of it as a microchip, where a god stole them in their hand, and they had instruction sets for, well, let's call it the ship or the mission control, and then they had to go chase her to get it, and she shut down operations. I mean, there's stories like that too. So there's a lot of advanced technology being discussed, but nobody would think of it as technology. The scholars would think of it as just fantasy, until Zechariah came around and he said, wait a second, this is a lot more. They shouldn't have known about this.
He looked at it and said, we've been visited.
Correct. What's funny is that's what every person believes who believes in the Bible. Because remember, God of the Bible is not a human, and it was not born on earth. By definition, that would be an extraterrestrial.
If he's physical, I guess.
Correct. But if he's not physical, then he's even more of an ET.
Sure.
Because he doesn't even have a physical form. So in Christianity's belief, he would have to produce a child to manifest his essence on earth. Well, the story of a character who's half human, half God is a very old story. That's one of the oldest stories that existed.
Now, if somebody looked at these tablets, though, Eric, would they also possibly misinterpret them as some fancy, some artwork?
Well, you can always misinterpret something and call it what it. You can say, "Hey, it's not what my eyes think it is." A person can have a block because this kind of information can destroy the foundational belief system that they have, and maybe convince them that everything they've ever been taught has been incorrect. So then they could see something and then not see what other people see. A person who's open-minded could say, "Hey, it's possible. Angels are coming down, interacting with humans, giving them commands. Wars are being started." It's obviously a story of humans being having involvements with ETs. Some people say God and angels. You see, you can label it anything you want, but the story remains. If you believe these stories in the Bible, well, then you have to believe the source material of the Bible as well.
See, I'm a believer in the Greek gods, that they were extraterrestrials as well.
Well, and the Greek gods are, George just borrowed from Phoenician sources, because the Phoenicians came and taught the Greeks, and the Phoenicians were the people where our language of Hebrew comes from. The description of the letters, the sounds of the letters, and the names of the letters are Phoenician names. And they copied the stories that were the Mesopotamian stories that existed, by the way, for thousands of years before it got to the Greeks.
So the Greek mythology could be just based on ancient stories.
Oh, in fact, it is. A lot of it has consistencies with stories that we're familiar with. You've got the brothers fighting. You've got the son who was killed or, reborn, avenging the death. You've got Zeus and lightning bolts. I mean, you have a lot of these things that are consistent with the Sumerian stuff and other things that come later in other cultures.
All right, give me your take based on Zechariah's work. What happened? Let's go all the way back.
Okay, if you think about the origin of our solar system happening 4.5 billion years ago, and then you consider that if life started on another planet in our solar system before us, it happened as fast as a snap. One snap of your finger is how much more these other people from a different planet became advanced and had the ability to have space travel. So they only beat us by a few 100,000 years. So he thinks about 450,000 years ago, these beings came here from the planet Nibiru, and they were advanced enough to travel through space, but only through the solar system, not from a different solar system. We're talking about neighbors within our system. They came here because their planet was losing heat, and they came to get raw materials. For a couple 100,000 years, they were mining and getting the materials they needed, and then there was a revolt. And the revolt is clearly described, and they complained, and so the leaders decided to make a primitive man. To make a primitive worker. And then they created humans, who they called Lulu Amelo, which was a mixed-up being. The word Lulu still existing in our current language to describe somebody who's mixed up. And we were created just like them, and the first model man was named Adamu, which is Adam.
Right, good point.
And the stories of these creations are consistent with the biblical stories of blood and clay and flesh and the God giving a spirit or a soul into the being. So basically, humans were created to help the gods do work, which is what the Bible says. But the Bible says it was to work in the garden. Well, the Sumerians say it was to work in the mines and other sources for the gods. And then there's descriptions of what happened during these times. And then what happens is it comes down to natural disasters, where after the Great Flood, the Anunnaki and the leadership of these beings decide that they need humans as partners, not just to dominate them, not slaves, but they need priest kings and other people to help them manage the growing population of humans. Apparently, we grew really quickly, and Enlil, whose brother was Enki, Enlil did not really like humans as much, and Enki favored humans and had many children from human females, by the way, which is the reason why the flood was given, which was to destroy the mixed-up beings who God did not like, which were hybrids. And so you have a situation where they decided to have humans be their partners. But family squabbles led to priest kings and wars. They went to war in the name of this god. They went to war in the name of this god. Eventually, most of them left. The reasons they left actually are very interesting. There is evidence from some tablets that they left because they were becoming older. Grandchildren were becoming older than their grandparents. Because on Nibiru, whose average orbit is 3,600 years, their time span of life, if they lived 100 orbits, they would live 360,000 of our years. But when they came to Earth, we zip around the sun so fast, they became subjected to a faster time frame, and they became really old. So there was a time where a lot of them left. The last one or two times Nibiru was nearby. Now, these beings were not so advanced that they could just jump off of Earth and get to Nibiru at any moment. They used Mars as a station in between. They didn't necessarily come to Earth when Nibiru was closest to us. They would have to jump off early, and then Nibiru would come around, and they would have to get back on again in the opposite way. And we know this from a visit that Anu and Antu, which was the chief king and his wife, visited Earth at the time frame of the beginning of the Hebrew calendar, 5,764 years ago, approximately. So we have kind of an indication of time of when Nibiru was closest, or at least nearby enough to visit from a couple orbits ago.
Oh, that sounds exciting and fascinating. Stay with us, Eric. Much more to talk with you about right here on Coast to Coast AM. We'll be right back. With our guest, Eric Parker. And Eric and Jason Martell will come back next hour. We'll take your phone calls. But more with Eric when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. Do you think many stories in the Bible, the First Testament at least, the Old Testament, reflected information that the Sumerians had, Eric?
Oh, yeah, there's actually no doubt about it. Some of the stuff that I lecture on and Zechariah lectures on, we can see direct copies from stories that were from much older sources. And in some cases, because nobody knew about this for so many thousands of years, they got away with it. It was plagiarism. It was, but it wasn't.
You couldn't sue them, though, could you?
No, but it wasn't done with malice. It was just that these were stories that were known for thousands of years.
They wanted to pass them on,
and they did. And each culture passed them on. And when you get to, let's say, the Moses era, where Alexandria, Egypt, has a library, and all the library has is the knowledge of the whole world. Okay, and everything that existed up to the time is stored there. So Moses, let's say, was brought up as a prince of Egypt. He would have had access to all this knowledge. Well, what's funny is a lot of the Moses stories are borrowed. His birth story is the same as Sargon the Great, king of Acadia.
Good point. You're right.
You know, born in secret, put into a basket, left to float in the river, found by a noble person and raised to be the king, and in Moses' case, the king of the Hebrews. Moses turning the Nile River to blood, that was done by Inanna Ishtar thousands of years earlier. There's just so many details of stories. Now, some of the stories are unique, like Moses taking his followers out and the plagues and all this, but the plagues themselves are not all originals. And so you have to question then which is original stories and which is not. But you can see the source of so many of them. The Tower of Babel, the flood, the creation of humans.
Why weren't we taught this years ago, Eric?
Well, okay, two possible reasons. One, to maintain the ideology or the dogma that we have